So a very warm welcome to everyone to our webinar here today on qualitative research. My name is Ivana Radovojevich, and I'm the project coordinator with ATLAS.ti in our Europe office. And today I have the pleasure of connecting with all of you to talk about qualitative research. And so in this webinar, as I was saying earlier, this is a special kind of webinar for us here at the ATLAS.ti team. Because usually we're dedicated to teaching how to use the software for analyzing qualitative data. But we also realized over the years that actually this is something, it's really important that we also talk more broadly about qualitative research and just how to think about carrying out a study and how to design it and go about the analysis. And so that's why we created this webinar to hopefully start getting us all thinking about this. Now, I've also put up our contact information here, so you can always reach me by writing to this email. If you ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out and we'd be happy to help. So I'd like to begin by introducing ourselves a little bit, to tell our own story of how we got to here today, where we are. And so I'm Ivana right here. But I also work very closely with my colleague, Dr. Neringa Kalpokas. She's the manager for Europe of ATLAS.ti. And perhaps you've also come across her if you've been involved in other ATLAS.ti courses or materials. And both of us have been working together for quite some years now, but I actually met Neringa during my own bachelor studies. And she was my professor. She actually taught me qualitative research in ATLAS.ti for the first time. And then after I graduated, I had the great fortune of continuing to work with her and ATLAS.ti, and we've done a lot of research together as well. And here we have just some of our most recent publications. And for example, we did one qualitative study on transitions to democracy and the role of political leaderships, the top leaders of a country and how they help that. And this was actually Neringa's dissertation research. And she interviewed the King of Spain, the President of Lithuania, and collected all this data. And then I also got to help her out with putting this together, but this was of course a qualitative study. She did interviews here. Now also over the years, we've been doing a lot more research just about qualitative research methodology and different ways of using ATLAS.ti, for example. And so we also have these articles as well, but we're both very passionate about qualitative research. And we both think that it's a really wonderful way to conduct research. And it's really important to be able to conduct this kind of open-ended research to explore new phenomenon and expand our understanding. And so that's why we're both really passionate about it. And we love teaching others. And that's why we've been working with ATLAS.ti for so many years and helping other people learn to use the software. But it's true that over the years, we did realize that, learning how to use the software is pretty straightforward. I mean, I can tell you in 1 hour which buttons you need to click in order to do the different tools, and then you know how to use it. But the real challenge, where the difficulties come with using the software is understanding why we're doing things. I mean, of course, how to add a code to a piece of data is really straightforward, right? It's a click of a button. But why would I make this code? And which code should I add? And how many codes should I add? And these kinds of questions, these are all methodological questions. And so this is really what inspired us to create this webinar and the courses that we also offer, where we start to give more advice on just qualitative research in general and the methodology and the design. Because whenever we use any software for analyzing our data, the software does not do the analysis for us. It does not tell us how to proceed. It's always us, the researchers, that are deciding. And that's why it's really important that we have a clear design and we understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then it's much easier to apply the software and to figure out how exactly we're going to go about answering our research question. But an understanding of methodology is just absolutely crucial for conducting any research. Now, all this being said, with this webinar, our goal here is really to give a global introduction. And so we don't focus on any particular methodology, because there are very many methodologies, and each one, of course, is different, has its own steps and procedures and things that you want to consider. So, I mean, it's not possible to talk about all of them in 1 hour, but rather what we're focusing on here are aspects that are common to most qualitative studies, and so that we can have an understanding of what is qualitative research, how do I get into this? And then from there, I really encourage everyone to reflect on your own research and your own research questions that you want to examine, and think about how might these things help you How might they not? But to really critically reflect, because always we need to adapt whatever we're doing for our own study so that it makes sense for that. There's no one size fits all here, but we want to at least give this foundation so we all have a place to start and hopefully spur that thinking so that from there you can continue to build your own study. So then I'd like to begin by saying, what is qualitative research? And well, most broadly, qualitative research tries to capture some aspect of our social or psychological world. And with qualitative research, we're trying to understand the meanings or the experiences of the people that we're studying. And so a great strength of qualitative research is that it allows us to interpret the messiness of real life. And so here, for example, we can contrast this with quantitative research. And so with quantitative research, what we typically are doing is we're collecting some sort of numerical or statistical data about people. And we're interested in getting as large a sample of people as possible, as many people as we can, so that we can look at broad trends and averages and patterns. But we're not interested in the individuals. Rather, we want to see the overall average or trend in the data. Now, quantitative research is, of course, a wonderful way of conducting research, and it gives us a lot of answers to really interesting questions that we have about our social and psychological worlds. But, perhaps we can already see here that there are quite some limitations for certain kinds of research questions. And maybe you are actually interested in what each individual is experiencing and how they're experiencing this. On the other hand, quantitative research can be limited because if we're collecting close-ended survey questions where we just have multiple choice questions that you choose A, B, C, or D, which one describes you best? I mean, this can be very limited because there can be so many ways that someone might answer that question or how they interpret that question. We can't just fit it all into predefined boxes. And this is exactly a great strength of qualitative research, is that we get to explore how our participants perceive things and understand or explain them. And then also more broadly, qualitative research is really powerful for exploring new areas where we do not have a lot of understanding. Maybe there's not a really well-developed theory there yet. And so that's why qualitative data is so important, because it is open-ended. So we get to get this really rich information so then we can start understanding that and building theory about it. And so usually you can also contrast this, that qualitative research is about building theory, while quantitative research is about testing theory. Both are really important and valuable, but of course, here we're going to be focusing on qualitative research. And so you can think about, in what ways can your qualitative study contribute something new and important and meaningful to your area? So what are some key things that we need to know about qualitative research? Well, first and foremost, context is absolutely crucial when we're doing qualitative studies. And so this again goes back to the idea that, we're interested in individuals' experiences and understandings, and qualitative research recognizes that we can never remove a person from their context. We can't take a single data point and then just look at this in isolation, because everything is influenced by context. How are you feeling that day? What happened in your past? How did you get to where you are today? All of this context is important to take into consideration in order to really understand this. And this is also why we talk about this messiness of real life, because that's how things are. There's always multiple things that are influencing us. The same goes for us, the researchers. We also have to think about our own context and what kind of perspective or outlook we might have. How might that shape the research that we're doing? And on top of it, when we're analyzing qualitative data, because it is so rich, you need the context to understand this data. And so, for example, I could do quantitative research counting the frequencies of words when people talk about something. But, imagine that people are talking about playing. Well, okay, we can see that they talk about playing, but how can we know what they're actually referring to without the context? Are they playing basketball? Are they playing a guitar? Are they seeing a play or playing a game? This is just one simple example of how context can really change the meaning of something. But this is just something that's always important in qualitative research when we're making sense of our data. Now, along these lines, qualitative research also recognizes that there are multiple versions of reality. So there's no one single truth out there that we can discover with our research. Rather, there are multiple truths, multiple ways of seeing something and understanding something, and that's something that we embrace. because this, again, it's just the messiness of our social and psychological worlds, and it's important to understand that as well. And then finally, as qualitative researchers, it's always important that we stay curious as well as critical and always reflexive. And so, of course, we're curious to learn about new things, but we also want to try to not always take things at face value. We are researchers, and so we can critically deep in and ask more questions of why and how. And of course, it's important to be reflexive, both on what this might be meaning for our participants, but as well as our own role in this process. And, recognizing that we are shaping this research and shaping the knowledge that's being produced. So, okay, then, with this little brief philosophical introduction to qualitative research, how do I go about then planning my qualitative study? So we like to give just some simple advice as a starting point for any research. And first and foremost, we recommend thinking of 2 theoretical keywords that you're interested in. So a theoretical keyword is simply a term for a scientific phenomenon, right? So something that is an object of actual research. And so to think of 2 keywords that you're interested in. And then when you have these 2 words, think about the relationship between them. And so maybe I'm interested in cultural diversity as well as the workplace. And then what kind of relationship between these 2 do you want to analyze? Do I want to see how cultural diversity is expressed in the workplace or experienced in the workplace? Or do I want to see how the workplace manages cultural diversity? So the direction of the relationship between the 2 keywords can actually really change the kind of phenomenon or issue that you're studying here. And so we do this exercise to think of our keywords, what relationship between them we're interested in. And then from this, we can build our research question. And so to actually pose what exactly it is that we want to know. And then as we're creating our research question and thinking about our study and the purpose of it, we should always be asking ourselves this so what question. So ask yourself, so what? Why should people be interested in this research? What implications might this research have? Could it help the people that I'm studying, or maybe to inform policy or decision-making in organizations? And it's always really important to think about these broader implications, because this is how we can really conduct meaningful research. So why is all this planning important? Well, because we have to first start with this research question, because this is going to really be the backbone of our entire research. And the reason that we really emphasize this and why this is so important is because the research question will first provide the structure for our study. So if I want to answer this question, what things do I need to do in order to get that answer? So we have to think about that. And in this way, we can structure what it is we're going to do, what steps we need to follow. Along these lines, a research question can also help us think about a clear methodology that we will follow. So like we said before, there are many qualitative methodologies out there, which is wonderful because there's many ways to explore our data, but it's always important that your methodology is coherent with your research question. That the methodology you choose will actually allow you to answer that research question. You don't want to choose something that has nothing to do with your question, because then you won't be conducting a good coherent study. And then all of this ties together into conducting rigorous or good quality research, so that it's clear what it is we want to do and what steps we're taking to do that, and so then how we finally arrive to our answer or our findings. And this is really just essential for just about any research, but it just goes to show why planning is important in this research question. And now it's true that with qualitative research, the research question can adapt. So we are flexible and we can change as we continue and, develop our understanding. And that's true. And we need to keep this open mind as well. We are, after all, qualitatively exploring something. But nonetheless, I think it's still essential to start with some research question. We have to have a starting point, because otherwise, if we're too broad and unfocused, we can really get lost in everything. So what about conducting a literature review? So once we've thought about our research and planned it, and we know, okay, what it is that I want to find out about, well, then we have to do some reading and see what do we currently know about this topic or this area, this issue that we're interested in. And so whenever we do a literature review and we're reading what others have done and published and the research that they've done about this area, well, we have 2 main goals that we're following here. And first and foremost, well, we want to understand the state of the art. What is currently known about this topic? If I was trying to answer my research question just with the literature review, what kind of answer might I get? And then by understanding what is currently known in this area, then we can also identify any gaps in current understanding, where we have some knowledge missing, where there are still unanswered questions, or there's still puzzles in the literature that we haven't been able to solve. And so by identifying these gaps or these oversights in previous work, then we can effectively try to contribute to that and say, okay, well, I'm going to try to extend our understanding because we don't understand this part of this phenomenon yet. And so I'm going to do research on that. And so this is a really powerful way as well to justify the value of our research and to show that this is something that is novel and interesting and that can have an important impact. And always our research, we're publishing in the academic community, we're doing the literature review from other academics. These are the people that we're having a conversation with. And to engage in that conversation with them, we need to see what others have done so we can also build on their work. And so with qualitative research, it's true that sometimes the literature review might come at different points. Sometimes you might just first look at data and then refer to previous work and theory. Again, this just points to why it's important to follow your given methodology, because that will actually guide you more in that sense. But most broadly, we all engage with the literature to know more about this topic and how to make sense of it and how we can contribute something new. So when it comes to conducting a literature review, we also want to just share some tips that I think can be helpful for just about anyone. First and foremost, it's really important that we search in more than one database. And so usually you might start with your university library or your institution's library to see what you can find there about your area. But then there's also Google Scholar is a great source because this gets information from a lot of different sources. As well, you might just want to look in top journals in your field and then just go to that journal's webpage and search for relevant articles there. But it's important to do this so that we do get a broader search and we make sure that we get relevant articles, that we're not missing out on anything. And then similarly, as you're reading the articles, then you make sure you want to keep notes on how you searched for it, keep note of all those full references for bibliography and your own critical reflections of what you're reading, and maybe pay attention to what those authors are citing. And if you see someone who's being cited a lot, then you might want to take a look at that article too. You also want to make sure you don't miss out on any classic works or things that have had a big impact so that you are able to contribute to this conversation in this area. And then when you are engaged in your literature review, so of course from this, we're going to start building our own study. And so we've already talked about our 2 theoretical keywords. And so, this will be the main things we'll search for, right? When we're searching online, we'll probably start by looking for articles about those keywords. And then as you're reading these articles, pay attention to how others are defining them. How are they talking about them and looking at them in research? And in this way, we can start to write the operational definitions of our own concepts. And as well, as we are getting more and more information and a better understanding, well, of course, we're not just looking at 2 concepts, but there's a lot of other related sub-concepts or dimensions. And so we can also start noting these down. And maybe you can even make like a mind map, right, with a pencil and paper to draw out how the things are connected. You can also do this in ATLAS.ti. And there's lots of programs that let you do these kinds of things. Certainly whatever you prefer. But what's important is that we do engage in this thinking. And what are the main things I want to look at? What else is related? And this is the beginnings of our conceptual framework. And this conceptual framework is going to be basically our map of the terrain that we're going to go exploring. And so once we have an idea of what are our main concepts and the other things that are related to that, then we can see, okay, so where do I need to find more information? When I start collecting data, what kinds of things do I need to ask about? And this is why this framework and the operational definitions are so important, because that is what's going to help us. For example, in our research on political leadership, we identified 5 different dimensions of leadership that seem very important, like power, decision-making, vision, negotiation, as well as communication. And so we had these 5 dimensions, and within each of these, there's a lot more different ways of negotiation, different styles of decision-making. And so by defining each of these, then we knew exactly when we went to go conduct interviews, what kinds of things to ask about and how we can identify these different types. And that's just one example, right? But just to show how this framework and these definitions are so important for guiding our research. So then we have our map, mapped out here. We know what it is that we want to know more about. And then how do we choose which methodology to follow? What data collection method and analysis method we should do in order to answer our research question. And so here we show just some of the main or the most common methodologies that you've probably also come across these, in your own literature reviews. And so, of course, they all have great things to bring, great advantages. It really just depends on your research question. So for example, if you're interested in understanding how people experience something and narrate it and explain it, how they make sense of it in their own minds, as they go through life changes and how they make sense of their own life story. For these kinds of questions, you might want to consider narrative research, because this is exactly focusing on participants' stories and how they build these stories. On the other hand, if you want to understand some experience or phenomenon out there that maybe a group of people share, and you want to understand what is it about this that these people share, you want to understand the essence of some particular phenomenon, then you might want to look at phenomenology. Maybe also you're interested in developing a new theory. Maybe you have an area of research, or you have a research problem where there really has not been a lot of research on this. We really just don't have any understanding. We really need a theory from this. Then you can use grounded theory. And so that's where you build a theory from the data that you collect. Maybe if you're interested in looking at some specific group that shares a culture, whether this is like a group of people or even an organization, you could use ethnography. So, immerse yourself in that group and understand their culture. Or maybe you want to look at different cases, different individuals or different groups or organizations, and you want to compare between them and understand. Then you could also use case study research. And so this is very briefly about these different approaches. Some of them might even sometimes overlap, or kind of have a mix of things. But certainly I encourage you to think about what is it that you want to know for your research question. And then if you're interested in any of these methodologies, take a look at resources on them, because there's so much information about each one and much more specific details about how to conduct it. And so then that's why once you know what methodology you want to follow, then you can find much more specific steps so that you can better adapt it to your own research. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about collecting data. And one of the most common ways of collecting qualitative data is conducting interviews, because we're so interested in people and how they understand things. We have a one-on-one conversation with them. And so a helpful way to think about an interview is that this is a professional conversation, but this is still a conversation. And so remember, one of the great things of qualitative research is that it's open-ended, that we can follow what our participants are saying. And so, of course, we're going to have an interview guide. We're going to think about what questions it is that we want to ask, because that, we are interested in collecting some sort of data. And this interview guide in particular can really draw heavily from your conceptual framework and your operational definitions. So I want to know about power. Well, how might I ask about power? And I want to know, are leaders using coercive power or reward power, or is it their charisma and their referent power? And so then based on all these things, we can think of questions of how to ask this. But remember, this is also a conversation with another human being. And we can't, usually we can't just directly ask the question as we write about it academically. You want to put it as well in everyday language. And also you don't want to elicit just socially desirable responses. You want honest answers. And so it's also important to establish that rapport and make the person feel comfortable to open up and, give you their honest answer. I mean, again, here, it really depends on what your research topic is and how sensitive perhaps that information is. But when it is something that's more sensitive, then you really need to be careful and think about how to establish that rapport and trust to get them to open up and to talk about that with you. But always, as participants are saying something, then you can ask follow-up questions and think, oh, that's interesting. I actually want to know more about this. And that's this wonderful thing in qualitative research, that we can explore these unexpected paths. And then oftentimes we can get really interesting and very helpful insights from that, things that we didn't expect to see. So another very commonly used method of collecting qualitative data is conducting focus groups. And so with focus groups, it's you, the researcher, and with a group of participants, and you're all, there discussing the topic at the same time. Now, a focus group is not a quick and dirty way to get interview data from multiple people at one time. It's a completely different way of collecting data. And so again, it depends on what kind of information do you want. And so with focus groups, typically we're interested in this social aspect, right? You're with a group of people. And so usually we're interested in seeing, how do people collectively understand something or talk about something? And in fact, when it comes to conducting focus groups, we don't even refer to ourselves as the interviewer, rather we're the facilitator. And in a good, in an ideal focus group, I guess, it would be you, the facilitator, posing a question. You still have your focus group guide and you have questions you want to ask. But then ideally, you'll have the participants talking among themselves. And maybe one says something, and then another one says something else, and then that sparks a discussion between them. And then you see how they build this understanding together. And that's why it's important to have this group. And it's this open discussion that, again, can go in a lot of different directions. But so that's the idea here, that again, we have our questions we want to ask, but we're also interested in how participants are interacting with each other. And there's a lot of other kinds of methods for collecting qualitative data. And so remember, qualitative data, it can be words or text, it can be images, videos, geographic locations. I mean, there's just so many possibilities. And here are some of the other main ones that you also might see. And so, for example, observations are also really common, especially in ethnography, for example, that you go and you just observe another group of people. And in that case, we're not directly interacting or asking questions, we're really just observing. And again, you'll have some guide of things to look for and notes that you're taking, but this is also a common way to collect qualitative data. Researcher-directed diaries is another interesting approach. And in this case, we ask participants to keep a diary and to write about something, how they're thinking, feeling, what they've experienced. I mean, again, it depends on your research question. And this might be every day or once a week. It can, the span can also change how long you're collecting the data. But this is a really great way to get much more fine-grained data on each individual, and especially to look at it over time, right? So you can see how they're understanding things. This also has the advantage that you are not present, and so maybe people feel more comfortable to open up as well. You can also conduct qualitative surveys. And so online surveys that you send to people, and then they can fill out their answers. But what makes this qualitative is that the answers are open-ended. And so you have a question, but then you just have a blank space where they can type their answers. And so this is still a type of qualitative data. And actually, qualitative surveys can be great just because it's so much easier, right? It takes less time and effort on our part to collect the data, and for participants as well, perhaps, and they can just click the link and send their answers. But there is also the drawback that you cannot do those follow-up questions. And so, that great thing with interviews and focus groups, that you can, maybe something that surprises you and catches your attention, so you want to ask more about that. Well, in an online survey, you don't have that opportunity, but we can, it's always important to think about the trade-offs between all these different methods, to think about how we'll go about collecting our own data. And then finally, we can even use secondary data, so data that already exists out there. You can analyze television, advertisements, and media, or other sources, even already existing diaries and archives and things like this. And so naturally, there's so much qualitative data out there that it's really up to us to decide what data we need to answer our research question. And in reality, we can do a combination of any of these different methods. And that's actually particularly strong, when we do that, because we can get interviews on people, but maybe we also observe, maybe we also look at some archival data. And then by looking at our research question from all of these different methods, then we also get a much richer understanding, because, people might say one thing, but later we might see them doing something else, so it's just this idea of looking at it from all these different angles, and that's always going to enrich our understanding. So then we've collected our data, and how do we go about now analyzing this? So if you've done interviews or focus groups, one of the first steps that we all have to go through is to transcribe all of these interviews and focus groups, so you probably have the audio or the video recording, and maybe you have some notes, but it's really so important to transcribe the entire interview or focus group discussion so that you can really analyze that data and dig deep into it. It's just a matter of converting that recording into text to really facilitate our analysis. It's not the most fun part of the research process, but it's something we all have to go through. And it's important to give ourselves plenty of time to transcribe. It often takes longer than we might think, and it's very tiring. So give yourself that time. It's also best to do it as soon as possible after your interview or focus group, while you're still fresh with it. And it's true that nowadays there are, software is getting better and better, and there's a lot of online services, or you can pay other professionals to do it for you. So if you have those resources as well, you can certainly explore that. Then once we have our data, prepared to be analyzed, then what most qualitative methods go through is some process of coding. And so what we mean by coding is that we go through our data and identify different segments of the data, and then we can attach codes to those. So a code can be also like a tag. We're going through tagging all the different bits of our data to organize this and to start condensing all the information. And so are they talking about coercive power here? Or are they talking about the leader's vision here? And so then we add these codes or these tags so that we can start putting all that information together. And this will help us get a better understanding of what's going on. And then once we've coded, it also allows us to later even take a step back and kind of look at our analysis in a more abstract way. We can look at patterns among codes and where we have what codes appearing. It just really makes all the qualitative data much more tractable for our analysis. Now, again, how exactly to go through coding depends on the methodology. And so each methodology also gives much more specific guidelines. Like, are you focusing on actions, or are you focusing on processes or opinions? So the methodology there is also going to be of great help. Now, more broadly about methodology and analysis approaches, we can talk about inductive versus deductive analysis. And so with inductive research, what our goal is to look just at the data. We're starting with our data, and from there we move up to build some sort of abstract understanding or explanation or a theory. Now, deductive analysis, on the other hand, starts with some theory, that we already have and know, and then we use this theory to analyze our data. And then we see, how can this theory help me explain what I'm seeing in my data? So kind of more broadly, you might have heard this before, that inductive research is sort of bottom up, moving from data to theory, while deductive research is top down. We move from theory to the data. And this is broadly how they're defined, but in reality, we can do a mix of both. You can also engage in abductive analysis, which is kind of iterating between your data and theory. But it's just so we can think about this, what are my goals here? Am I actually interested in taking some theory that already exists to see how it applies? Or do I really just want to make my own, or even to do some combination of both? Maybe you build on previous theory, but you also keep it inductive to explore, unexpected things that might come up. And so this is also, and I mean, qualitative research can be both inductive and deductive. It's not that deductive research is only quantitative, but it's just the idea of what is it that we want to do with this analysis. Now, a very common question is often, when am I finished with my analysis? Because there's so much rich detail in our qualitative data, and so many interesting things that come up that we might want to go exploring. And so it can be really hard to figure out when we've reached our end point, when I have a satisfying answer to my research question. And so a commonly used concept when it comes to this question is this notion of theoretical saturation. And so the idea here is that, we're collecting data and we're analyzing data, and we're often involved in both at the same time. We do an interview, transcribe, analyze it, and then do another interview. And the idea with this is that we're developing our understanding. And then after the first interview, we already have some ideas. So in the second interview, maybe we'll ask some more questions, or we'll know how to word this better. And then we can keep exploring like this. Now, the idea of theoretical saturation is that as we're going through our analysis, once we start getting to the point that no new information is coming up, then we can, more or less say that we've reached a satisfying answer to our research question, or in the findings here. once we see that, yes, okay, what the participants are saying here, that, yeah, no significant new information is coming up. And so that's a helpful way to think about that, when we can say, we can stop now with the analysis. And so, talking about all of this rich data, how do we make sense of all of this? And so we've already talked about coding, and this is important for condensing all the information and organizing it. But there's another equally important part, and that's writing memos. So writing memos simply refers to writing down our notes and our ideas and jotting these down in notebooks, on pieces of paper, in a software. Where and how you write it is up to you and what you find most comfortable. But it is absolutely crucial that we are writing. Many qualitative methodologists even say that analysis is writing, and you are not analyzing if you are not writing. And so it's really just to drive this point home that, as we're immersed in our data and analyzing it, we certainly have all sorts of thoughts and ideas going through our heads. And this is what we need to be writing down in memos. And this is this whole process of critical reflection and digging deeper into the data. I mean, we might start just by describing what we're seeing. And okay, so this participant had this experience, they talked about that. And then as we go through subsequent cycles of the analysis, we'll be reading our data multiple times. Then we might start digging deeper, to go beyond just the face value of things. But why is this happening? Or what about this? What's the context here that might be impacting this? And so all of this goes in our memos. And it's just this whole practice of, forcing ourselves to put our thoughts into words. It really helps us develop our understanding of what's going on in all the data. I think it's also important to keep in mind when we're writing these notes, do not force yourself to write perfectly or correctly or with academic language, because these notes are just for you. It's you making sense of all of this data. And then later you're going to put these together. And of course, when you're doing the final report, that's where you'll polish everything up and, put it correctly and with the right terminology. But certainly while we're just writing our memos and analyzing the data, you don't need to be doing that. And what's important is that you're getting your ideas down on paper. And so this is really the foundation of the qualitative analysis is coding the data and writing memos. Now, all this being said, it sounds very straightforward, but when it actually comes to doing this in practice, you might find yourself thinking, okay, yeah, but really, how do I make sense of all of this data? And how do I start drawing and verifying conclusions? And here we've always drawn a great inspiration from Miles, Huberman, and Saldana. They have a wonderful source book, actually started with Miles and Huberman, and then Saldana also joined. And it's just a great source to have. And so they have this quote that's just wonderful to summarize this whole idea. It was Sir Ken Robinson who first said that, well, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And that's why it's important to collect data when we're doing research. But then Miles, Huberman, and Saldana came and said, well, without verification, you're just another researcher with a hunch. And so they really advocate for this whole idea that, yes, you go through analyzing, you start getting ideas and potential conclusions or findings, but to make sure we're not just following a hunch that we have, it's important that we verify these conclusions. And so we go back through the data and see, does this make sense? And how can I adjust this? And in particular, in the book, they give a whole list of strategies and tactics that you can follow that help with this. And here we list just a few of them. And so, for example, they talk about some tactics for generating meaning. So for just first understanding what's going on. And one really helpful way to do this is to contrast and compare. So to make contrast between your participants or the things that you're looking at, whatever unit of analysis you're interested in, but to contrast between the different ones and to start noticing what's similar among these, what are some things that they share, and what's different, and why are they different, right? And where are these boundaries? And so this helps us to already get a better understanding of what's going on in the data. Another really interesting tactic is making metaphors. And so with this idea, you might be seeing something, but you're not quite sure how to explain it. So maybe you want to start thinking in terms of metaphors. How is this similar to something else that you've seen? Maybe some other example that might give you some ideas. And when we think in metaphors or similes or even just models, this also helps us to look at this in a different way, to get more to the essence of it, to see what other kind of metaphor might be applicable here. And another helpful way to make sense of your data is to build logical chains of evidence. And so this just means you take a look at, all the data that you have and think, okay, so where did they start? And then what did this lead to? And then that led them to think like this. And then this happened, and of course, depending on the research and what your data consists of, but you can start to link these things together to start kind of noticing these patterns and kind of what is the overarching trend here. Now, again, these are just some suggestions, and it's not that you need to use all of these, but I hope that it at least gets you thinking of ways that you can explore your data to start kind of generating this meaning. Now, they also talk about different tactics for verifying the findings. So once you've analyzed and you have some ideas of your conclusions or answers to your research questions, then it's important we verify this, right? So that we're sure it's not just some hunch that we have, but it really is present in the data. And so one of the main ways that we can verify our findings is through triangulation. Now, triangulation simply refers to the idea that by looking at a point from different angles, we can get a much more accurate understanding of this point. This actually refers back to map making and, how to specify the location of an object. It's in reference to other objects, right? You need multiple ones to get to that exact location. And it's a similar idea here in research. So then how can we triangulate? Well, we already actually talked about one of these, and that's collecting data with multiple methods. And so the logic here is that if we're seeing the same patterns in our interviews, in the archival data, in the observations that we conducted, well, then we can be a lot more confident that what we're seeing is really there. And so that's the idea of triangulation. If we're seeing it in different methods, then we can feel better that we are really our conclusions can be verified. We can also carry out triangulation with multiple researchers. And so if you're doing teamwork and then each person is seeing the same thing or agreeing, that's also a great way to verify your conclusions. And you can also do combinations of methodologies like quantitative and qualitative research. And again, if you're finding the same patterns, that's also really building the trustworthiness of your findings. Now, another important thing is to always check for researcher effects. And what we mean by this is how we, the researchers, might have impacted this data, how we might have maybe shaped the responses that were given. And so again, here, this notion of critical reflexivity is really important. And, it's often, quantitative research often tries to eliminate all bias, to be objective scientists that are looking at this. Qualitative research completely rejects that idea because we know we're all embedded in context. You can't just leave your context at the door when you go and do research. Of course, it's a part of you. And so we actually value this subjectivity because this is what allows us to interpret this data in different ways. But of course, we need to be aware of how we're also shaping this research, that we are constructing this understanding together with our participants. And so it's always important by critically reflecting. And many times this also, it can be as simple as just including in your research a little bit about you and, your own interest in this and how that might have even shaped your understanding of it. And so you can see this in published studies of qualitative research. And so they're showing that transparency so that when other readers look at this research, they can understand where this person is coming from. And then finally, another tactic that I think is really helpful for verifying your findings is to go through and rule out rival explanations. And so I'm seeing this, I think this is the explanation of the story of my data. But what other explanations might there be? To kind of play our own devil's advocate here and think, well, what else might explain these patterns that I'm seeing? And then construct a rival explanation and go through your data and see, does that actually explain this phenomenon better? And if it does, then, maybe you want to adjust. But if not, you can rule it out and say no, because it doesn't talk about this, or doesn't take that into consideration, identify the weaknesses. But the idea is that you can rule out these rival explanations. So again, you can really verify yours, that you show, I didn't just go with the first answer that I found, but I really did consider all the different ways of explaining this. And I do believe that this is the best one. So again, these are just some examples to help get you thinking about it. And certainly there's many more. And so talking about, verifying our conclusions, it's also important to think about the quality of qualitative research. And so often, I think when we're all first educated in research, it tends to be more quantitative focused. And so maybe we're all familiar with terms like reliability and validity, generalizability. And so these are quality criteria for quantitative research. But these criteria do not make sense at all for qualitative research. We're not interested in generalizability because we don't want to know how entire population is and what the average is. We're actually interested in these specific individuals because they have some unique or different aspect. And so we can't apply the same criteria when we're judging qualitative research. Rather, what we can talk about, and this is Auerbach and Silverstein, they talk about these, and they're also very helpful criteria that we also use personally in our own research. And the first one is transparency. And so it's really important that we're transparent in everything we're doing and how we're doing it. And so the idea here is that, I'll present the conclusion that I came to. And when you read the research, you don't have to agree with that. You might have some different conclusion or idea of how this could be better explained. And that's perfectly fine. But what's important is that you understand how I got to that conclusion. So we don't have to agree, but it should be really clear how that conclusion was reached. What was the question? How was data collected? How was it analyzed? And then how did we reach these findings? And this is transparency. And this is also why the operational definitions are so important, to transparently describe what we're doing. And this actually leads into communicability. Now, the idea of communicability is that we are able to communicate what we have done and how we have done it to other people, and that they can understand this. So it shouldn't be just some kind of vague or murky thing of how this was analyzed or how these concepts were understood. We should be very clear in what it was that we were doing and how we were understanding it. And also communicability touches on this notion of, are you able to explain your research to other people? And perhaps you've heard of this, like the grandma test, try to imagine yourself explaining your research to your grandmother or grandfather, someone who's not an academic, who's not in this area, because this really helps us to think about it in different ways and kind of get down to what is the core thing that I'm interested in here and why am I doing this research? And then that really helps us to focus on what is it that we want to communicate to other people. And then finally, absolutely important for good quality qualitative research is coherency. And coherency means, as we've been talking throughout this presentation, that we have coherency between the research question that we're asking, the data that we're collecting, and how we're analyzing it, and then the answer that we're giving to this research question. And so if we've been, carefully planning and reflecting on everything throughout the process, then we're much more likely to have this coherency. But it's a problem when, you just collect some data and then you decide afterward what you're going to look at, and then you try to fit that data into your research question, or you're using a methodology that's completely inappropriate. That's all lack of coherency. And then this just means that the findings that you present, they're not as trustworthy. Is this really what's going on there? And can we trust that? But when we do go with transparency, communicability, and coherency, we really make our work much more trustworthy. So when other people read it, that they can also learn more about this phenomenon. And so talking about, explaining our analysis to other people, we again draw from Miles, Huberman, and Saldana, and they famously say that you know what you display. And so a huge portion of their book is actually talking about all these different ways of displaying data. And displaying data, basically what the idea here is that either we're displaying our data in tables or in graphs or charts or networks, some kind of graphical display. And so we can have tables where we organize our data according to different rows and columns. We can have different subsets, and then we fill in the cells. Or we can make networks where we put different concepts and draw connections across them. How are they connected? Or maybe we look at trends across time. We can also use software like ATLAS.ti to look at which codes are appearing together and how frequently are they appearing together, and is there some relationship among these concepts? There's so many ways that we can display our data, but it's just such an important part of the qualitative analysis because, well, we've done a lot of writing, right? We're writing and writing and writing in our memos, but it's really easy to feel lost in all of that. But then when we force ourselves to make a display, put this in a network, put this in a table, then it really helps us to get down to the essence of what's going on here, to think about, okay, how are these things related? What's the overarching picture here? And it's really so important for our own thinking process and to understand what's going on, and also for communicating this to other people. We've been deeply involved in this data. We're super familiar with it. But when you talk to someone else or someone's reading your study, of course, they don't know anything about it. And it can be hard to convey all that rich information. But displays really nicely condense and summarize this to show people, here's the main story of what we're looking at and what we found. And then, of course, we'll explain this all in more detail. But displays are just essential for making sense of qualitative analysis. And so then when it comes to finally writing up your whole study, one important thing to keep in mind is that really it's all about the edit. And so what we mean with this is, as you're writing, especially your first draft, don't bog yourself down too much on getting every sentence perfect and, spending all this time thinking of how do I say this? What should I say next? Just put it down on paper, try to let yourself write as freely as you can. And then, because anyway, we get that first draft done and we spend the majority of our time on editing, because then you read through it and you see, does this make sense? This idea, actually, this should go later. Or maybe this actually isn't so relevant. I can remove that. Or here I need more explanation in detail, then you can check it. But you have to have that first draft in order to be able to work with it. So just think about what we want is to dedicate plenty of time to editing. So just get that first draft done so you can work on that. Now, when we are actually writing up our final analysis, it's also another point that we're going to go back to the literature. And the reason for this is that, we've analyzed all this data and we have much more understanding and new ideas and insights after collecting and analyzing all our data. And so then we want to go back to the literature and see, well, something unexpected came up that I didn't know was even related here. Let's see if somebody else has looked at this, or let's see what other people have said about this concept in particular. I didn't even plan to do research on this concept, but it came up in my research. So let's see what others have done about this, and to tie it again into the literature. And as well, in general, what you found and the whole story of your data, you also want to show how that ties into literature and how this can inform what we currently know about this, how we can move forward from here. And then finally, as you're writing your own study, you want to construct your own story. And, what is it that you did and why did you do this? And then how did you do this and what did you finally find? You take readers through your own story and journey. And then that also just makes for great qualitative research. And so if you're also interested in eventually publishing your research, sending it to a journal and sharing it with the scientific community, here we share some interesting tips. This is an article about reasons that I rejected your article. These are from journal editors, and these are the top reasons. And so you'll notice that many of these things we've been talking about throughout here. So hopefully you won't fall into these problems, but you can see that these are common things, that either there's a lack of theory to link to, operationalizations and concepts are not in alignment, how you're defining something and then how you're actually analyzing it, or that there's not enough definition or rationale, that the flow in the overall organization isn't good enough, the tone and how it's done, so the research design. So all of these are really relevant things, and they happen. Of course, research isn't an easy thing to do either, but I think at least if we can think about these things, then we can also avoid falling into this as well when we go to publish our own research. Now, finally, I do just want to briefly mention how ATLAS.ti can fit into this and help with all of this, because this is a software for analyzing qualitative data. And so ATLAS.ti, originally it was designed for the point at when we're actually analyzing the data. So we've designed, we've done literature review, we've collected, and then we get ATLAS.ti, and that's where we add our data. And it can help us with coding all of this data, because of course we can attach codes and do all sorts of really interesting analyses with these codes. We can also write memos that we can attach to all these different segments of data. And so it really helps us with making sense of everything. Now, on top of just helping us stay organized, it can also help us really explore the data in different ways, because we can look at different patterns, look at code frequencies or which codes appear together. We can create displays like Sankey diagrams and networks. And today, so ATLAS.ti, it's been around for decades now. And today it's really grown, and it's just such a great tool to have for research. And like we said, it does not do the analysis for us, but it is something now that even accompanies us from the very beginning. So as soon as I started a study, I create an ATLAS.ti project, and we have where we can write all of our ideas and planning. We can sketch out our mind map. And then we can do the literature review as well, put it in ATLAS.ti to read and make sense, and then add our data and also keep analyzing that. It also makes teamwork so much easier to have multiple people looking at the same data. And you can analyze any type of data. So especially if you want to do videos or geographic locations or tweets from Twitter, then using a software can really help there. And so we have all sorts of resources on our website that you can take a look at. And like these free webinars, like the one we're in here today, we'd love to see you again if you ever want to connect again in the future. We also have premium courses. And here we go into a lot more depth and detail on using ATLAS.ti. And we also have courses just on qualitative research. And now, naturally, all of our courses are online. But we have live online courses just like this. And we also have self-paced courses where you have 30 days to complete the contents at your own rhythm and pace. And so we have these courses all year round. So if you're interested, please do send me an email. I'd be happy to send you more information, as well as discount coupons. We're always offering different discounts. So I promise I'll always look to get you the best discount that we have available. And also upon completing any of our premium courses, you'll receive an official certificate from the ATLAS.ti Academy. And then aside from trainings, we also have many, many resources like video tutorials and manuals and a blog where you can find more information. And so I just wanted to show here a little bit about our self-paced course on qualitative research. Although later this year, we will also be having a live online course where we meet for 3 days, 2 hours every day to go through all these contents in a lot more depth and detail. And so that we also have that option. But if you prefer to learn at your own pace, you can sign up as well for our self-paced course. And so we have all these different modules. So we go into much more depth with each of these. And so you can complete all of the lessons. There's a video class that you watch. Then there's a PowerPoint with detailed notes that you can then download and keep forever. And then there's tests just to check your understanding that you got the main concepts. And then we also have exercises so you can apply what you've done. And so it's certainly a great way as well to go through, and you can even do this with your own data. I mean, that's what we encourage, so that you can follow through the exercises and everything with your own data to help with getting your research started. And so with that, we've seen our global introduction to qualitative research. So I hope everyone enjoyed the presentation. And remember, this is really just the idea to start to get us thinking about qualitative research, but you always need to think about your own study and methodology that you want to follow, and look at resources on that methodology and look at how qualitative research is done in your area. We come from organizational behavior, but qualitative research is done in health, in education, in engineering. There's so many different areas in which it is applied. And so you want to look at journals in your area and qualitative studies published there. And of course, talk to your professors, your colleagues to get more ideas and advice. But here as well, I also just wanted to share the main resources that we use in creating this course and these contents, in case you'd also like to look into any of these for more information. Brown and Clark are a great kind of introductory material. I think it's a great way to get to know qualitative research. And Miles and Huberman naturally are, they just give such wonderful and practical advice, especially on all these different displays. So any of these are recommended, but also take a look in your own methodology and you can find lots of information. And so with that, I'm happy now to take some time to answer any questions. I understand if anyone needs to leave, but I'll try to be quick. And actually, I can put up my contact information again here. It's just clients@atlas.ti.com. And in case anyone has any follow-up questions, I'd be happy to help out. And so, yes, if anyone would like to receive the recording, just send me an email and let me know, and I'd be happy to send it to you. I think it takes a little bit of time to save and convert. So maybe tomorrow, probably, I would send it. But yeah, just drop me an email and I'll get that to you. And so, yeah, so let's see. So I hope I answered people's questions about ATLAS.ti and how that can help. Thank you very much for the positive comments as well. And so let's see. Yeah, so one person is saying that, yeah, you're collecting interviews from 11 participants. So naturally, you can't generalize just from this. And so then how do you go beyond merely reporting what the participants have shared? Since it's a mix of responses and opinions, sometimes articulating opposites. And yeah, this is a great question. And so, because you're not interested in generalizing here, exactly, you want to understand what these people are saying. And there is a lot of contradiction even sometimes. That some participants experience this while others that. And I mean, to go beyond just merely reporting what they're saying, I think here it's also really valuable to think about connecting to the literature and to see, so what is this problem and how has it been studied before? And then to think about what new insights can you draw from this? You know, some qualitative studies also even, they can propose a lot of directions for further research. And by saying, okay, so we noticed that this is happening, but of course, in order to really understand this better, naturally, you know, maybe more quantitative research should be done with larger samples of people to understand this better. But we can see clearly that this is occurring. Now, on the other hand, I think, I mean, also merely, I don't know if it's even merely reporting when you are doing the qualitative analysis. I guess the idea here is we don't want to just describe what they're doing, but, you know, we do dig into it and to ask ourselves why and how is the context impacting this, because we are being guided by some research question. And so, and I think that is a great contribution. But yeah, it can depend. Some researchers can really criticize this kind of aspect, but I think that's just not understanding the value of this subjectivity in it. But yeah, I don't know if this is answering your question, but feel free to send me an email and I'd be happy to talk more, maybe specifically about it if you want to tell me a little bit more about your research. And so yes, all of these courses offer the certificate from the ATLAS.ti Academy if you're interested. And so someone else is asking about a qualitative content analysis. And so, yeah, that's a great question. And so, for example, you can look at our video tutorials on the word clouds and word lists. That's a great way to start, just to analyzing word frequencies. And then you can also go through and start coding those. Yeah, great. Thank you, everyone. I'm glad to hear that this was helpful. And also a question about semi-structured interviews for case study analysis. Yeah, so in a case study, interviews are a really common way to collect data. Usually with the case study, you're collecting multiple kinds of data on each case. And so interviews are a part of that. And exactly, they're semi-structured. So that's the kind of interview I was referring to. It has a guide, but it's free to change. That's why it's semi-structured. But as for, you know, more specifically about doing interviews and case study analysis, I mean, again, it depends on your research question and that conceptual framework and your operationalizations. So to think, what is it that I want to know? And what do I want to ask this person? And also think about that person's role. So for example, in Nedinga's research, when she was interviewing with the political leaders, I mean, she also interviewed many people that work with these leaders and ministers and ambassadors and secretaries and news reporters. And then you also want to think about each person's context. And if you're talking to a secretary or you're talking to a minister, what kind of perspective do they have? And then based on that, what kind of questions do I want to ask them? And then we can adjust like that. So that might be also relevant in case study research if you're thinking about the specific case. But I mean, it really depends on the research. It is hard to give general advice, but feel free to drop me an email as well. And I'd be happy to talk more. So thank you, everyone. Yeah, I'm sorry to go a little bit over time here. But yes, and yes, this self-paced course here that I mentioned, this is also taught by me, as well as later this year, I believe in July, I'll also be giving a live online course. But yeah, I'm happy to send you more information about that. But the self-paced course is also done by me. And it's these same contents. We just spend about an hour on each topic. So we go into a lot more depth with them there. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. It was certainly a pleasure. It's always great to talk about qualitative research. I think it's a wonderful way to conduct research. And so I want to wish everyone all the best and lots of motivation to go through. It is demanding on us researchers, but it's definitely well worth it, I think. So then with that, we'll go ahead and close the session for today, but we'll certainly be in touch via email. And other than that, I just want to wish everyone lots of health and all the best in your qualitative research. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.